Appeal, and now this. I'm Jay Willis. Today we're returning to our series, Our Future on the Ballot, where we're talking to candidates for office from across the country about what they stand for, what they don't, and maybe what they hope to do if elected to office this fall. And my guest today is Kara Eastman, who is running for Congress in Omaha, Nebraska. In 2018, Kara came within about 5,000 votes of winning. And this year, she's back to take another shot at ousting Republican incumbent Don Bacon. Kara, thanks so much for joining me today. I want to start with a little question about how your campaign strategy has unfolded. You know, conventional wisdom has long dictated that in order to win in the Midwest, Democrats have to run on a really sort of down the middle centrist platform. But you've done something a little different. Your campaign is instead trying to mobilize working class voters by touting your support for things like Medicare for all. I'm sure you've encountered this in talking to voters on the campaign trail and probably long before that, frankly. What do you say to critics who think that you're too radical or too progressive for a red state like Nebraska? How do you deal with that?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Fair enough.
Thank you for having me. That's a great question. One of the things that we have found now in running, and I've been running for about 4 years, is that the policy positions that I support are popular among the vast majority of Americans. So most people support raising the minimum wage, doing something about climate change, taking bold action on climate change, ensuring that kids live in safe, healthy, affordable housing, that we expand healthcare and actually create a system where we're saving the government money and regular individuals' money. So it's interesting how we've kind of allowed the narrative on some level to be divided between the parties and also the mainstream media, when in fact progressive policies are supported by the majority of Americans.
Everyone who runs for office sort of brings a different perspective to it based on their previous experiences. And I know you were involved in social work before you entered politics. How has your experience in that shaped your approach to your efforts to get this job?
So I've spent over 20 years in nonprofit organizations, starting them, running them, and so I've worked in domestic violence, homelessness. I started a national volunteer program for people with ALS. And for 12 years, I ran a nonprofit organization in Omaha called Omaha Healthy Kids Alliance. And I feel very fortunate that my worldview has been shaped by the clients that I've had the honor of serving in all of those jobs. So when I think about the way that the federal government should work, I know that people are struggling and that they feel like they don't have a voice. And that frankly, now that I've been running for a while, I've seen that they don't have a voice, that corporate interests have a voice, that special interests have a voice that is so much louder than the vast majority of Americans who actually need the government to work for them.
You've talked about the popularity of what we usually call progressive policies, even in places that we might not think of as progressive. In your experience talking to voters, what do you think the disconnect is? Why is it that sort of the popularity that you see on the ground doesn't always translate to successful bids for candidates who support those policies to office?
Well, Nebraska has traditionally been a prairie progressive state. And so when we think about the way that our state is made up, my district is 98% urban suburban. Not necessarily something people think about when they think of Nebraska. But the rest of the state is pretty urban or pretty rural. And so things like climate change have deeply impacted our state. Our farming communities have been decimated by flooding. 90% of farms in Nebraska are family-owned farms, and they have been gouged by the investments in big factory farming. So it's been kind of this interesting disconnect where Many of the people who live in these areas have decided to support Donald Trump. But I think that that's because of the basically the corporate takeover of politicians. I think we've seen a number of corporate Democrats in our state and in this district who have prioritized the needs of the very wealthy and large corporations and special interests over the needs of regular working people and of people of color and of communities of color. And so I think it's taking some time for people to get used to this idea that there's somebody running here who really does want to represent them. But there's voter apathy. There's definitely a sense of disillusionment with both parties. And people are frustrated because they're struggling to put food on the table. They are struggling to keep their farms going. They're struggling to just be able to find access to public transportation to get to work. And so I'm proud to be running the campaign I'm running because this is what we need more than ever.
You mentioned the corporate capture of politicians. It's a nice opportunity to ask a little bit about your opponent, Don Bacon, who has launched attack ads calling you a radical socialist who wants to get rid of cows. Where do you think this rhetoric comes from? Why do Republicans focus on the socialist label when launching attacks at their political opponents?
It's fear mongering. And so think about a place like Nebraska, we have more cows than humans. How would one even go about banning cows? It's ridiculous. And I'm not a socialist, I'm a Democrat. We just haven't seen one that often in this area. So I think they don't have a policy platform to run in. We saw that at the RNC. My opponent does not have an issues page on his website. He tells you to call his office to find out where he stands on things. And he's gone back and forth on some policies, on other policies. I mean, he has voted 93% of the time with Donald Trump and then claims to be bipartisan. So he really doesn't have anything to run on. So instead, they're creating a caricature of me and calling me names and trying to make people afraid to support me. But I'm not sure that it's working because in the latest poll, I'm 3 points ahead.
I think maybe we should clarify for the record, do you want to get rid of cows?
No, I don't. I don't even know how I would get rid of one cow.
Okay.
How would I do that?
Well, moving on from our farm animal related segment of this talk, you support a significant federal jobs program for building out green infrastructure. And those are terms we hear a lot in Democratic politics these days. But what specifically would this program entail? What would it look like for somebody in your district if this program were to come into existence? What are those jobs?
So I want to be clear about what I support, and it's based on my own experience. I ran a children's environmental health organization that focused on energy efficient, safe, healthy housing, lead-free housing for kids. And what we saw was that when we took public and private investments and put them into local communities to create healthier housing, we were able to increase the tax base for that community. We were able to create safer, more comfortable living conditions, healthier living conditions. We were able to lower utility costs for the families that we were helping. We always require a little bit of skin in the game. So we had these families like actually involved in making healthier housing for themselves. And we were able to create a green workforce, people trained in these skills. And to me, this is where we start. We partner with community colleges, we partner with local businesses, we partner with unions, and we partner with government programs to create a robust green jobs program where we're investing in communities that need the investments the most and also combating climate change. So there's so many benefits to doing this holistically. And it's also the way that we can jumpstart our economy right now because it's failing because of COVID. And we're going to need good paying unionized jobs that actually are all local. This isn't stuff we can outsource to other countries.
I want to return to electoral politics for a minute, especially because your district has such a unique role in it. So we've seen Republican leadership in Nebraska indicate that they hope to redraw the congressional districts in the future to make it even harder for Democrats like you to win. And this has potentially significant implications, not just in politics, not just in Congress, but in presidential politics too, because If you've ever seen a map of the Electoral College, Nebraska does not distribute its electors on a winner-take-all system. And this is sort of that wonky purple district that allows a Democrat a shot at winning an electoral vote in Nebraska, what's considered a deep red state. I believe President Obama did in 2008. Mm-hmm. My question to you is, what's it like to be campaigning in a district that might soon be redrawn out of existence? How does that factor into your pitch to voters?
That's a great question. So, and that's definitely a fear. The district was gerrymandered in 2011, and there's certainly now, I'm sure, efforts at the drawing board to do that the second that I win, and probably gerrymander me out of my own district. So this is why local elections are so important, and why we need to change the makeup of our state legislature, which we're a unicameral. So we have a unique system in many ways in Nebraska, but it's definitely a fear. I think it was Hakeem Jeffries that said that, he had been gerrymandered out of his district and called it gangster, which is exactly what it is.
What can be done in your state about this?
So there are efforts among state legislators right now to try to stop this. And across the country, we need to change this anyway. We need to end gerrymandering and have independent third-party bodies that are involved in redistricting. And the problem is, no matter what party's in charge, benefits from this current system. And so, but it's a fundamental threat to our democracy, and we need to change it for the better.
Some of the policies that you're running on, we talked about a Green New Deal, we talked about Medicare for All, aren't policies that Vice President Biden supports. Mm-hmm. So if you're elected to this office, what would you do under a potential Biden administration to try and advance those policies? What does your argument to your colleagues look like there?
Yeah, that's a great point. And this is a key difference too between my opponent and me. He's been a rubber stamp for Trump, voting with him 93% of the time. I'm not going to be a rubber stamp for my party. I'm an independent voice who wants to go to Congress to represent this district. And one of the things that we've been doing on the campaign trail is having robust conversations about healthcare. And Joe Biden and I are probably like this far apart when it comes to the difference in how we approach looking at our healthcare system. My concern with the way that he and some other Democrats are putting this out is that it's the fiscal note attached to it is going to be so large that it won't get through Congress. And so I am making the pitch that we need to do the most fiscally responsible thing. And the bill that I particularly like, HR 1384, the Medicare for All Act, sponsored by Pramila Jayapal, has been proven that it would save at least $2 trillion over the next decade. We need to be looking at ways for the federal government to save money, and also ways that we can promote, and provide freedom for healthcare choices for people, freedom to choose your provider, freedom for medical providers to actually provide the care that they want without having to run things through an insurance company. And people right now they're drowning. They're drowning in premiums, copays, deductibles, out-of-pocket costs. And there's a better way. There's a better way to actually do healthcare in our country that's not bowing down to corporate interests, pharmaceutical companies, insurance companies, but actually starting to put people first.
A couple of quicker questions to take us out here. I understand that during the most recent debate, your supporters played a fun game of bacon bingo, where they had bingo cards with some of the sort of most stock lines that he would use against you. Wondering, in your experience, what was the most predictable line? Like what filled the most of those bacon bingo cards in that debate?
Oh, that's a good question. Socialist certainly was up there. Bernie Sanders, that was another one.
Noted Nebraska politician Bernie Sanders, yeah.
Yes, and he and I look so much alike. I can see why we would be confused for each other. Those two were pretty up there. Government takeover of healthcare, the usual. And that's what's so silly, is these are speaking points, and they're handed to candidates like my opponent, and then he just regurgitates them. And there are ads running right now in this district that are running all over the country with, take my face out and put a different candidate in, and just use those same attacks. And it's a shame. It's a shame that we can't just put policies forward for people, tell people the truth, and then let them decide. But instead, engaging in these fear tactics that I think, frankly, I think Americans are smarter than this. I think they know. And one of the reasons why we've run the grassroots campaign that we have is so that people get a chance to know me and get to hear about my policies from me and from my supporters and from my team. And so I think that I have faith in the voters that they will make the right decision and that they'll, disregard a lot of that ridiculous stuff that they hear.
If you win this fall, you'll have an office to decorate in Washington. What goes on the walls from your district? How are you decorating this?
I decorated my office. Well, we have our campaign colors on the wall from Nebraska that I want to ask to come and help me. We would pay them to do that because I believe in paying artists. But that, and my daughter's an artist as well, and so we'll be exploiting some talents too.
Last question for you. I understand that Nebraska current football is currently undefeated. My question to you is, for how long will they remain undefeated?
Well, our first game is tomorrow, so we'll see. Time will tell.
Look, that's not a detail I was going to reveal for the benefit of Nebraska football, but if you want to spill that, that's your journey.
Hey, everyone here is excited. I wore red today even to celebrate tomorrow.
Wonderful. Well, I know we're getting to the end of our time here. So Kara, I really want to thank you for joining us here on The Briefing, Our Future on the Ballot. Folks, the appeal will be live again at 4 Eastern with The Count, which is a show about what happens after a close election in the 77-day period between the close of polls on November 3rd and Inauguration Day on January 20th. That's a period of time that gives me anxiety to just think about. If you have not already, please follow Appeal News on Facebook and The Appeal on Twitter for more news, shows, and updates just like this one. Thank you again for watching and have a great weekend.